Everything is still a mystery. No one knows how it happened or has a valuable explanation for it, only that it happened, and nobody was left to explain it. It was a perfectly regular day. The morning sky was as clear as dawn could be. It was barely 8 a.m., but the sun already stood in its full angry god mode, gazing down with furnacing malice. The perfect silence, interrupted only by the sound of rushing water against rock and his buzzing alarm, jerked him back to consciousness. He groaned as the dull ache hit the back of his neck. Hendrik had fallen asleep on the couch again. This time, just like the last, with a bottle in hand. His plate was on the table from his previous meal, with leftover crumbs on it. With a not so gracious move, he pushed himself up, picked up the plate and set it in the kitchen. Hendrik did not mind the silence. In fact, it was something he craved so much, which was why he decided on this house. It brought him close to things he loved. The sea and the silence away from the maddening noise. Every morning was the same. He got up before other fishermen thought of coming on shore or getting their boats ready. He filled his little cooler with beers and ice, then hauled it out into the morning. The wind greeted him as he made his way to his boat. "Morning, Hendricks," Cullis greeted as he stepped off his big boat, reaching Hendrik for a handshake. The two exchanged handshakes before Hendrik stepped into his boat, unanchored it, preparing to sail into the sea. "Going off on a ride this early? What can I say? My baby misses me, and I miss her too," Hendrik responded without turning to face Cullis. Cullis gave a quick nod, then turned away. The boat geared into motion, water splashing behind it as it moved into the open sea, leaving the shores behind. The splashing water behind him and the roaring of the engines continued on to a distance until he was far enough from the shores to settle the disturbance in his mind. Only then did he kill the engine, letting the silence fill him, then collapsed onto a chair. He closed his eyes, sucked in a deep breath, and turned on his radio. The song "To Love a Woman" by Lionel Richie was on. Old memories began to surface. Memories he had long buried and tried so hard to forget. Hendrik had been on one of his voyages when his house had caught fire. His wife and child died in the flames. From the sea he had spotted the dark flames rising to the clouds, but couldn't return until he had made some supplies on the fish he had caught for the day. It was the one decision that haunted his every night and lonely thought. Had he gone the minute he saw the smoke, perhaps he would have been able to save his family. It was the end of fishing for him, but he could not part with the sea for some reason. Instead, it gave him a sense of comfort to sit here, staring into the skies and listening to the radio channel, hoping that something he shared with his wife would play and their sweet memories would resurface in his mind. The radio channel always indulged him. He took a sip of his beer, continuing his daily torture when the radio went silent, and the soothing voice replaced with static noise, buzzing like 1,000 insects all at once. He reached for the radio, adjusting the antennas with little to no mind, but the noise remained. No trace of the song he was listening to a few minutes ago. The song began playing again. He sighed, leaning back on the stretching. Hendrik did not know when he fell asleep, nor did he realize what woke him up, only the eerie feeling that caused him to jerk from his sleep, almost tipping over the boat. The radio was still on, but the music had long stopped, replaced by some news. "This is a strange phenomenon with no possible explanations. All the bodies in the local cemetery are missing as though someone had dug them overnight. Hold on, we are getting another call." Hendrik shrugged off the feeling. People always did weird shit all the time. He had no doubt someone had thought it funny to scare the cemetery attendants by digging up the body. It's going to wind up somewhere soon. He was about to switch the channel to something else when the newscaster's voice returned. "Our source just received even more intel that 5 cemeteries in New York, 8 in Alaska, and 6 more here in Babrock have all experienced the same incident. It seems to be a nationwide incident." This time, dread crept through his skin, making his whole body crawl. He could not shake off the feeling he had. Holding his breath, he waited a few seconds, listening to the ongoing news. His gaze traveled into the distance to the suddenly darkened sky. The clouds hovered just over the horizon, shielding the sun from view. A cold shrilled down his spine at the darkness like a thunderstorm circling over the sky. The bright blue cloud over the sea remained as clear as day, as though every other place did not threaten to collapse on each other. "What the hell is going on?" he murmured to himself. The silence echoed through the boat, disturbed only by the waves crashing against the side of the boat and the confusion racing through his bones. A voice boomed from his radio, unclear. He could feel the pain but could not quite understand. He stared at the radio, long and hard, trying to make out what the voice said. "I want to fall. We want to fall. We need to fall," the voice continued to repeat. One voice turned to two, until there was a cacophony of voices singing the same chorus repeatedly. Instinctively, he reached for the radio, turning it off, but the voices continued, undisturbed. "We want to fall. We need to fall. We need to fall." Hendrik could not help but feel like he was losing his mind. It was the only possible explanation for what was going on. He picked up the radio from the cooler, and the voices grew louder, crying for help intensely. Without thinking, he tossed it into the water. His heart was pounding furiously in his chest. He closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. Thunder rumbled through the sky, pulling his focus to the world of darkness, engulfing everything except the water, where it was like it was something to avoid. The sky was in chaos, and yet the sea remained unshaken by it. It was usually the water that roared more when the weather was bad, but now, it seemed, for whatever reasons, things had reversed. He could sight the rain falling against rooftops and the heavy cries of thunder and lightning tearing through their dark skies. Whatever is happening there, here is the safest place to be, he told himself as he sank to his seat again, uncocking another bottle of beer and began drinking. The rest of the day went by with him staring into the vast sea, alone, waiting for the sky to clear up, even though it never did, and it continually rained for days. And no matter how much the sky seemed to roar or how dark it grew, the sea remained calm for the rest of the day until he drifted asleep. Lucy stood before him, her bright golden hair glinting under the sun. They were in a strange garden. He had no idea what they were doing there, but he did not care. He was more than happy to see her now, to see that one-sided dimple when she smiled. He raced into her arm, pulling her tight. She smelled, as he had remembered, of lemonade. "I miss you so much, Lucy. Every fucking day," he breathed. Lucy only gave him a sad smile, and for the first time since the dream started, something clicked. This could not possibly be Lucy, because Lucy had died in that fire that day. Burnt to crisp alongside his daughter, she could not be here, now, smiling in front of him with not a single scar on her body. "Where's Anna?" he asked, taking a step back, scanning the weirdly familiar garden, despite not knowing it. "We went to fall, honey," she said, placing one hand on his cheek. Hendricks jerked awake on his boat with the urge to throw up. He raced to the end of the boat and let out his bile into the water. The image of his dead wife was very much alive in his head. He could not shake it. All this while, all these years, he had not dreamt of her, not once, not since her death, and now, she appeared to him in this wrong illusion. He could just not bring his head around it. Something was fundamentally wrong somewhere. He just couldn't explain it. He stared at the cloud again. The sun had risen this time, as clearly as it had the previous day, with no trace of the strange cloud that once hovered around the whole continent. For a minute, he regretted not keeping his radio. How would he understand what had gone on now? He pushed the thought from his mind, wiped his lips and started his boat, reversing back to shore. By the time he arrived on shore, There was nothing but absolute silence. Not even colors was there, just the boats gently swaying to the rushing wind. But Hendrix thought nothing of it. It was not quite unusual for the shores to be empty. In fact, it was the reason why he lived so close to it. That and the fact that he could easily get on his boat whenever he desired some deeper peace only the sea could bring. He made a walk to his house, picked up his car keys and headed into town. If he wanted any clue as to what happened, only there could he get it. Cold chills crept up his spine at the sight in front of him. Everywhere was dead silent, as though the whole city had fled overnight, leaving everything behind. He watched in shock, unable to wrap his head around what was in front of him. The silence was grave. He stopped in front of the local supermarket, sitting inside his car for a few seconds as he scanned the surrounding. Nothing. Nobody walked the streets. No cars parked outside the supermarket either. The sign remained open, but he could not see a single soul. Pushing down the eerie feeling crawling through his gut, he turned off the engine and made his way inside the supermarket. The door swung open, and silence met him again. The usually crowded supermarket almost always filled with children running around. Parents calling to their children, and friends having conversations, was as silent as the sea on the most peaceful of nights. Hell, even more silent. "Hello?" he called out as he strode towards the counter, picking up a crate of beer and other things along the way. There was no response. Nothing. There was no one behind the counter, not any of the attendants that were there before. "What the hell is happening here?" he cursed out loud again, turning to another aisle of the supermarket. Again, nothing. Hendrix reached inside his wallet and pulled out the cash and placed it on the counter. "Yo, your cash is on the counter," he called out, even though he knew he would be greeted by the same silence. Tossing the groceries into the back of the car, he drove out of the supermarket's parking lot into the streets again, still keeping an eye out for any living thing. Fuck! His heart almost jumped out of his chest as his gaze rested on a window. He pressed the brakes, trying to calm himself. Slowly, he stepped out of the car, turning to the window. There was no way he could possibly have seen what he thought he had seen. He stepped out of the car and made his way to the window, each step burdened with the sight before him. On the porch of the house sat a skeleton, the chair swaying as though someone had moved it. This has got to be some kind of joke, he thought to himself, but it wasn't. It was happening. The seat swayed, and the skeleton remained fixed there. Every part of him begged him to flee, turn back and call the police, but somehow, he knew how that would turn out too. He knew even if he dialed the police now, there would be no one to pick up. Hendrix's worst nightmare was confirmed when he turned the knob of the door and met 3 more skeletons inside the house. Holy fuck, holy fuck, holy fuck. The skeletons clung to each other. He could tell what this was. From their sizes, they were definitely the children holding on to their mother out of fear, and the one outside was the father. He didn't need to see more. He had seen more than enough. Without a second thought, he raced out of the house, pulling out his phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed 911. There was no response. He redialed again and again, but the same thing happened. Slowly, the reality of things was dawning on him. There was no one here. Whatever it was that had happened the previous day had taken every single person in the city and replaced them with this. No, not just the city. If the 911 operatives were not responding, then this was just beyond their city. It was far worse. Hendrix locked himself inside his car, calming his beating heart. For some reason, he was not turned into a skeleton like the rest of the world. He was alive. Something had to be different. The clouds. He recalled the clouds had not covered the sea. It had rained everywhere else. The sea had saved him. He started his car again, and drove as fast as he could, past every corner, through the empty streets, his gaze occasionally catching sight of dead people inside the houses from their windows or open doors. He parked his car on the shores, reaching for the groceries he had gotten, and raced onto his boat, zooming as far away from land as possible. He had no idea what happened, and chances were he wasn't going to. But one thing was certain: while he had been on the water, he had been safe. It was the only place he could possibly be at the moment. He killed the engine when he felt far away as possible and collapsed onto the deck of his boat, staring into the sun.